The pace of life is hectic. We are forced to react and adapt at great speed to a world of increasing complexity. Our instincts are no longer reliable, and we use ourselves, mind and body, unthinkingly in a distorted and damaging way. As we rush through life, we ignore our bodies. In our race to achieve, we ruin our health, and we pay the price for this constant pressure: fatigue, depression, and anxiety. We accumulate bad habits and our muscles tighten. Our breathing becomes shallow, our shoulders are hunched, and we pull our bodies down. Even at home there is no escape, and simple jobs now cause us problems. Whatever we do is hard work, and we waste our energy. We can no longer return to a balanced resting state, to a peace of mind. But must we always react with such tension and pain? What can we do? Sir George Trevelyan, knighted for his contribution to humanity, trained as an Alexander teacher on Alexander's first training course. He tells us where to start.
There is one part of the universe which you really can control, and that is yourself, your psychophysical self.
We cannot change the world, but we can control how we react. At work or play, we have the choice. We can direct our bodies with strain and tension, or with freedom and poise. Dr. Kathleen Ballard, an Alexander teacher, describes what nature intended.
From my research experience and my reading of the scientific literature, I can see that Alexander's discovery is based on fundamental truth. During my Alexander lessons, I soon learnt that my hasty movements contributed to my problem. Our haste and anxiety to do things quickly involves us in rapid, jerky movements which can harm us. Most babies move in a deliberate, unflustered way. The eyes leading the head and the head leading the body. A way which we admire and can learn again. See how the motivated, alert animal moves with the head leading and body following in a seemingly effortless, elastic flow from head to tail. Although we humans are vertically aligned with the head balanced on top of the spine, nevertheless our heads must lead us too if our movements are to be smooth and free. The head needs to be able to nod backwards and forwards in the point of poise on top of the spine, and this freedom to move is a necessary part of movement and allows the head to lead us. So that if Luce allows that freedom, the poise at the top, then her head can truly lead her into movement as the animals achieve. As she's standing, she can then also have this same freedom of the head to nod, subtly below the level of consciousness, and maintaining that freedom allows her to move in any way she wishes, without any preconception of the movement to take place.
This head, neck and back relationship encourages ease of movement and freedom from stress. If the neck is free, then the head can lead the movement and the body follows in a natural elastic flow. The Alexander technique aims to restore this natural pattern and teaches us to maintain it in activity. Sue Thame, an Alexander teacher, illustrates this relationship with anatomical detail.
Stress. Whether you're talking on the phone, and whether you're going shopping and carrying those heavy loads home, whether you're lugging things in and out of the car, all your daily activities can be done either efficiently with a minimum of tension or with misuse, as we say in the technique, with too much tension. And what we're going to do is find out in the anatomy of your body how you misuse yourself and how you can change that misuse so that you get the best out of yourselves. So we have here the beautiful curves of the back. This is the strongest structure with these curving shapes. This is a sideways view in cross-section that we're looking at. Here we are looking from the back, and we see the straightness of the spine when looked on flat from the back, absolutely straight. Now, most of us as adults don't have backs that look like that. We've lost it.
What we've lost is the delicate balance on the top of the spine where the head should pivot freely upon these two bony structures called the condyles. We've developed habits of reaction that continually interfere with the freedom at this meeting point of head and spine, the fulcrum. Sue explains where we go wrong.
The center of gravity of the head is something like here. It's forward and up of the point of balance. And you can see this described on this diagram here, where the weight in front of the fulcrum is heavier than the weight behind the fulcrum. So the head always has a tendency to fall forward. And so we have behind here a tendency to pull the head back with strong muscle contraction to hold the head in place. You've got to balance this heavy weight. And unfortunately, in our society, we've lost the art of doing this.
We've lost the art of maintaining a free neck with the head leading forwards and up that allows the back to lengthen and widen. The knees bend freely away from the hips as we maintain our upward poise. In contrast, Judith acts out what tends to happen. We tighten the neck and pull the head back and down, causing a collapse of the back. We then lock our hips and knees and pull down even further. If we continually tense our bodies, we lose our upward poise and soon become stuck. Sue illustrates.
And on this particular chap, what we see is that each of the joints is lined up on the point of balance so that he stands with the minimum of tension and his head weight is very delicately balanced on this long structure. With this guy here, though, what we see is that his head is pulled forward. And what he's actually done is he's tightened the muscles here in the back of his neck to counteract the heavy weight of the forward direction of his head there. So he's collapsed himself like this. And haven't we got here the picture of old age? Don't we all sink into this gradually in our old age? Here, by contrast, we have the military structure, and he has pulled his head back behind the line of balance, again with a massive tightening of his muscles at the back there. So he's much more like this, very stiff and formal. This loss of poise, which is the poised position being this lovely upright balance, has a whole impact in the way in which we use our body.
As we can see, we have developed unconscious habits of misuse that continually interfere with our head, neck and back relationship. We tend to repeat these habits in everything we do, at rest and especially during activity. Sir George recalls a meeting with Alexander.
And he says, "What on earth have you been doing with yourself?" So I thought, well, what do you mean? He said, "Well, show me what you do when you fence." So I took the position, I lunged and all, and then he showed me what I was doing, that as I lunged, back came my head like this, my body twisted and my back came in, with the result that my back was being pulled out, my whole trunk was being pulled out of shape. And if you think repeating this again and again, the same movement, constantly, intensifying this drag back of the head and the pulling in of the back. Now, in all the training, nobody had ever mentioned what one was doing with oneself as one did the movement. One was just shown the movement.
It's the job of an Alexander teacher to point out to the pupil these habits of misuse. So let's watch Anthony as he gives Faye her first Alexander lesson.
That's great.
He's asked her to get out of the chair, go for a walk, and then sit down in her familiar way.
Okay. Now, did you notice anything strange about the way you did that? Anything?
No.
Did you notice what you did to your shoulders? No. Okay. Right.
That's how I walk.
That's how you walk. That's how most people would probably get in and out of a chair. Get
Faye
out
must
of the
now
chair
become
your
aware
normal
of
way.
things she never noticed before.
Fine.
By
Now,
stopping
what
her
we
in
want to
the
do
act
now
of
is
going
stop
into the
you.
chair,
Halfway.
Anthony can show
So
Faye
start
how
to
she
get
is
into the chair.
habitually misusing herself.
Stop. Okay, good. Now, do you notice what you're doing to your neck here?
It's back.
That's right. You're throwing your head back and you're contracting or shortening this area of your neck. Right, so what's going on right here is that this heavy head, the skull, which weighs about 10 to 12 pounds, is bearing down on the spinal column. And that's what causes the contraction. It's pulling down and bearing down into the hips, which gives a sensation of heaviness. Now, most of us do this all the time, so we don't notice that it's strange or a problem.
We are
So let's
so
see if
out
we
of
can do it a
shape
little
that we
bit
no longer
differently.
register that anything is
So,
wrong. So
allow
in
me
changing
to
from wrong to
give you a
right,
little bit of
we must not
experience
rely on our
freeing
feelings of
around.
correctness as a guide. Our feelings are deceptive. Let's now watch as Anthony stops Faye in the act of getting out of the chair in her familiar way.
Stop. Good. Okay. What tends to happen, as you remember, is that the back rushes forwards, the head pulls back and down, and we shorten this area of the back. The back rushes forwards, the head pulls back and down, we contract the neck, and all that weight bears down onto the spine, causing all this pressure down in the lower part of the back, where a lot of people tend to get back problems.
The pupil
So we're going
learns
to
that
try and
these
do
habits of
everything.
misuse tend to occur
So you
in
remember
every
that-
activity. Let's see what happens. The second we react to a stimulus or go into activity, we exaggerate our misuse and further distort our head, neck and back relationship. This reduces our upward poise. Alexander pioneered a unique twofold solution: inhibition and giving directions. Stop and think. We must prevent ourselves from reacting or moving with our habitual tension. Then we can choose to send new messages to our bodies that encourage and maintain our freedom and poise. In Alexander, this is called thinking in activity. Sir George first defines inhibition.
The great issue of the profoundest importance is realizing the significance of what Alexander called inhibition, of the ability to withhold reaction to a stimulus. Instead of running intermediate instant reaction, it's the ability to stop, to say no, and not to react, which is not simply a repression, very much the reverse. It's a release into freedom. Because the thing that binds us is the old habit patterns, the old reflexes. And if you can really stop, say no, I will not react.
We can now give conscious directions to the neck, head and back, allowing a more natural coordination of our bodies.
I will not react. I will release the neck. I'll allow the head to go forward and up, the back to lengthen and widen, and let my breathing just rise and fall.
Anthony now guides Faye in a new use of head, neck and back. Her job is to say no to old habits of tension and give new directions to herself that encourage freedom and prevent her from going wrong. She's bound to feel strange in this new use because it's unfamiliar.
Freedom in the neck as you think upwards, as you come back from the hips. Freedom in the neck as you think upwards there, as you come forwards from the hips, and wait there. Look after all that lengthening without pulling that head back and down. The head still wants to lead the movement as we come even further forwards from the hips. And wait, and you still want to look after that freedom in the neck and the head leading. Now, without pulling those shoulders up round your ears, allow the head to lead the movement as your heels go into the ground. That's very nice. Okay. Now, did you notice any difference in that way of getting out of a chair than the normal way, your usual way?
Yes.
How would you describe it?
Lighter.
Lighter, that's right. Now, all that was happening is that instead of pulling the head back and into the spine, the head was tending away and you were taking all that weight up and off the hips. So there was a lightness going on in the body rather than a pull down and a heaviness.
This time, Faye will go for a walk without Anthony's manual guidance. She will try to maintain this new coordination with the aid of her own thinking and directing.
Allow the head to carry on releasing upwards and away, no rushing. That's it, keep the neck nice and free. Don't rush forwards, but let the head lead the movement as the heels go into the ground. And you carry on thinking of that as you go forward by yourself. That's it. Carelessly, thinking of the upward idea, looking around you, not pulling the head back and down.
Faye is back in her chair, but her thinking is not over. Sitting is something we all do for much of the day, at work and at home, and most of us distort ourselves. Sue explains about sitting.
Here are the sitting bones. Can you see they are like rockers, and they are weight-bearing. They're designed to carry the weight of your body when you sit down. And would you notice how the joints of your leg, here they are coming up, are above the sitting bones, and also how the tip of the tail of your spine is much higher than the sitting bones. Now, what normally happens when you sit down? You sit down, and then you sit down. And as a result, you'll find that you sit back onto the tip of your coccyx, the tip of your spine. Now, when you slump back like that, the pressure that you put on your spine multiplies by 200 to 300%. And the wear and tear as you sit on your discs is enormous. And that is one of the major causes of back pain, which we all suffer. When you sit and slump, not only do you lose the strength of your back, but you also interfere with your breathing.
Sue describes our breathing apparatus.
Here, attached to your breastbone, are the fixed ribs, and they have very little movement in them. Very often people think that this is where they do their breathing, and they say, stuff. And what they're doing is actually moving their shoulders up and down, and they're not moving their ribs at all. So these are the fixed ribs. Then round about here, towards the bottom of your breastbone, you've got ribs 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 that drop right down, and they have a long ligamentous attachment which takes number 10 right down into your waist here. And if you stick your fingers in your waist, you'll feel them, and you can just tip from side to side, and you'll get a sense of the ribs there. And then they sweep back and up behind you to attach back into your spine, and the floating ribs 11 and 12 are just half ribs at the back here. Now in this back of your, deep back here, in these ribs, is the big bulk of your lungs which expand when you breathe, and it's this area of your rib cage that really needs to expand when you're breathing. Well, it would do if it could, but when you're sitting, as most of us do, as we've looked at, what happens? You sit, and here's your rib cage, and then you sit, and your poor old ribs drop right down into your stomach, and you lose the space, you lose the gap here, you collapse yourself, and the poor old lungs and the poor old ribs haven't got the space to move in.
So we can see that distorting this head, neck and back pattern at rest, and especially during activities, can cause fatigue, breathing difficulties, backache, heaviness, and so on. Alexander lessons include table work. Table work helps us to unravel some of the distortions that we've created during our everyday misuse. The teacher guides and gently encourages a pupil to release these tensions, especially along the length of the spine, and to maintain this new freedom and activity.
So the first thing we do is we focus in on the neck. You want to allow that neck to be free, which means you don't want to tighten the front of the neck, the sides of the neck, or the back of the neck. As you just allow me to move your head. That's right, without you trying to push it anywhere or pull it anywhere, just an allowing. It's just a little message that you're sending to your neck to be free. That's right. Now, while staying with that thought of a free neck, you'll probably notice that your head then starts to release a little bit away from the back. And this will happen if the neck's free. The head actually tends away from the back because it's not being contracted and pulled in. So you stay with that idea of the head tending away from the spine with a free neck, which then allows the whole back to soften and undo and unwind, which allows the back to lengthen and widen away from the hip joints. So we have three things that work as a whole pattern, as a total simultaneous pattern. We have a free neck, we have a head that then releases away from the spine, and a back that then can release up and away from the hip joints. So that's the three major things that we consider as a total pattern. The neck, head and back relationship. Now, you stay with the idea of a free neck and the idea of the head pointing out there, and allow me to lift up your leg. That's good. Not interfering or trying to do anything or trying to push it or pull it anywhere. Now you probably notice that that actually softens somewhere in the lower back. That gap, that hole in the lower back has disappeared a little bit. You're a little bit flatter against the table. And that's what we want. So when you're practicing at home by yourself, always point those knees up into the ceiling to give your back a chance to release a little bit more. What the tensions and stress of everyday life does to us is it causes us to pull in and contract every joint into the nearest joint. So we tighten the neck, the head goes back and down into the spine, and we pull into the hips. In Alexander, we're trying to encourage the opposite process, which is the idea of the neck being free, the head tending away from the spine, the back lengthening from the hips up there and widening, and then we've got a possibility of growing upwards and outwards. Now the shoulders are also involved in this. If the neck's free and the head tends forwards and out, which means we're not going to pull it backwards and down into the spine, then the shoulders have a possibility of also tending away from the back. And everything has an outwards tendency, an outward flow. That's good. Your job is to stay with the idea of a free neck, not to try and tighten it or to feel it to be free, but just to allow it to be wherever it is, sending it a message of freedom. Now we could add on to that the idea for the knees and the legs. If you stay there with the neck and head and back, lengthening and widening, then the knees can come up there away from the hip joint, rather than be contracted downwards into the hips. So you can actually point those knees up into the ceiling. Not to push them, just to allow them to point up there, the way you'd point a finger. You wouldn't necessarily move the finger, you'd point the finger. So you can just point those knees up into the ceiling, away from the hip joints. So they're pointing away from the hip joints, and they're also pointing up there away from the ankle. So allow that upwards idea to be maintained as I move the legs. And again, think upwards as they move nice and freely in the hip joint. That's right.
Lying down by yourself in this semi-supine position reinforces the benefits of the Alexander technique. By taking the weight off the spine, this procedure allows the discs to reabsorb the spinal fluid and regain their natural sponginess. Also, if we use the power of our mental directions, this encourages the muscles to release from chronic contraction and return to their optimum length. A visible benefit is that by reducing the overarching of the back, we look and feel slimmer as well as taller.
Then point that head upwards.
Throughout this section, you have been learning the theory of the Alexander technique. You can now start to observe yourself and others at rest and in activity. You may then be able to recognize real examples of good use or misuse.
Sit on the sitting bones and have the feet about 1.5 to 2 feet apart with the knees pointing upwards, and gently let your spine uncurl bit by bit onto the ground, letting the back release until the head touches the books. So how do you know how many books to put under your head? This is very important. What you don't want is too many books under your head. It'll pull your chin into your chest, causing an overextension of the back of the neck and a contraction of the front of the neck. But nor do you want the opposite extreme, which is too few books under the head, which causes the back of the neck to be contracted and shortened, and an overextension of the front of the neck, with the chin pointing up into the ceiling.
The amount of books you need will vary from person to person. A rough guide is when the neck is parallel with the ground and the back of the neck is long and free. Please refer to your teacher, who will indicate the right amount for you. You will now observe a demonstration of giving directions. The meaning of these directions can only be conveyed by the manual guidance of an Alexander teacher. If you have not received Alexander lessons, you can benefit simply by lying down in this position.
While you're lying down on the floor, let's return to those 3 major components of this unlocking mechanism, this key to the release from stress and tension. So start again by paying attention to the release of the neck. Send it a message. Speak to the neck. Remind the neck to be free. Don't try and move it or feel it out. Just allow the neck to be free. Now already that little message to your neck will allow the neck to be freer than before you sent that message. You may not notice it, but the effect will be there. So, at the same time as thinking about the neck being free, you can actually add on a thought. Encourage the process of the head releasing away from the back. Add on that second message for the head to release forwards and away. The forwards is a little unlocking in the back of the neck on those 2 condyles that we saw earlier, and the away is that little extension away from the spine. Already the spine will have started to release because the head will not be bearing down into the spine, and therefore the spine will have that chance of releasing, of unwinding itself, and it can then start to return to its natural length. But it may help to actually add on a thought to the back to lengthen and widen away from the hip joints. So now you've got 3 ideas fused together. 3 ideas that although we start off with the neck and then move on to the head and on to the back, we can actually think of these 3 ideas as a total pattern happening simultaneously.
Let the neck be free, to let the head go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen, to send the knees away from the hips. But remember, the directions are thoughts, not muscular movements. They will do themselves. An essential part of the widening of the back, as Sue explained earlier, is allowing the breath to occur naturally. Breathing is not a chest activity of sucking in air, tightening the throat and lifting the chest. It's in fact a back activity. The lungs fill out at the back and the floating ribs expand outwards. Anthony now demonstrates.
Now while you're trying to do this by yourself, even right now, just notice that maybe you're holding your breath. Maybe you're concentrating too much. Maybe you're fixing or staring. Now all these things will tighten you. They'll stop that free-flowing and streaming potential of the body. So, if you're holding your breath, remind yourself that you can breathe. Place the back of your hands here on the floating ribs. That's just below where you think the rib cage may be, up here. And as you breathe out, notice how these floating ribs narrow towards each other a little bit. And you may notice that after you've breathed out, the air rushes in through the nose and the floating ribs expand again outwards as the back widens. So always be aware of this potential of the lower back to widen during the breathing. So just observe that breathing. Don't hold the breath or fix or concentrate, but allow the breathing to occur naturally as the lower back widens and the whole back then has a chance of softening onto the floor, getting longer and wider. So now you've got that total pattern of neck free, the head forwards and out, the back lengthening and widening away from the hips. You can also add on the idea of the shoulders releasing away from the back, the elbows away from the shoulders, the wrists away from the elbows, the fingers away from the wrist. You can also add on the idea of the knees pointing up into the ceiling away from the hips and up and away from the ankles as the feet spread on to the ground. So enjoy lying down on the floor, maybe for 20 minutes a day, or a quarter of an hour every day, going through the whole of the sequence, remembering that it's a total sequence, not just one after the other, but the ideas all at the same time. Starting with the neck, remembering the neck and going on to the head, remembering the neck and head and going on to the back. And all those three ideas together as you go on to any other parts of the body that you may want to include in your general awareness. You'll soon start to feel the benefits. You'll start to realize that the back is gradually lengthening and widening and softening, that your hips are freer, your shoulders aren't so crunched up around your ears, that your neck's freer and your head is tending away from the spine. You're returning to a more natural upwards and outwards tendency, the way nature intended.
You can also remind your breathing to occur naturally while you're sitting. Remember inhibition and direction. Do not force the breath. First pause, give directions to your neck, head and back, then allow it to happen. Sue demonstrates.
If you're under pressure, if you're feeling tense, if you're handling a difficult phone call, if you're writing a difficult report, or if you're just sitting listening to someone as you are now, your breathing sometimes stops. And if you're under pressure, you hold on to your breath. And so you diminish your own vitality in that way. If you're sitting in a natural way, you just blow the air out gently. And if you let it flow back in, you'll find that your ribs automatically expand down here. And you will make a gentle exchange of the air in a good natural way. Just try that, will you? And you let the air flow simply and easily back through your nose. That change in the rhythm of your breathing will also calm you, because your emotions are very closely linked to the whole breathing pattern. You laugh and your whole breathing structure changes. You cry, your breathing system changes with sobbing. And a gentle flowing breath will calm you if you're agitated or if you're feeling uptight. And it will also bring the oxygen through your bloodstream into your brain. You'll start thinking more clearly as well. So
Correct breathing is essential for health and also a major factor in good speaking and especially public speaking. Sir George illustrates with a sonnet.
Just look at this. They that have power to hurt and will do none, that do not do the thing they most do show, that moving others are themselves a stone, unmoved, cold, and the temptation slow. Now do you see what I'm doing is shutting my mouth and allowing my lungs to fill. Now compare this with what you mostly hear. They that have power to hurt and will do none, that do not do the thing they most do show, that moving others are themselves a stone, unmoved, cold, and to temptation slow. They chiefly do inherit heaven's graces, and husband nature's riches. It's ghastly. And what I'm simply doing is breaking the reaction completely. I don't say a poem. On the out-breath, I simply say, they that have power to hurt and will do none. And I stop and let the breath fill and wait that time while you think of what the poem meant. They that have power to hurt and will do none. That do not do the thing they most do show. Who moving others are themselves a stone, unmoved, cold, and the temptation slow. They chiefly do inherit heaven's graces. And you see, we've got it slow. It gives you time. This is the other point about poetry, because most poetry recitals are useless. You just don't know what it's about, because you can't get complex thoughts like this at a rush. And so, by the length of time it takes for me to allow my lungs gently to fill again, that's about the length of time it takes for you to grasp that thought. Aha, that's what he said. And then we build another thought on it, and everything is stilled in the most wonderful way. It's a wonderful example of inhibition in action. And that can be taught to people. And in this way, one is teaching the real Alexander technique.
The real Alexander technique is about applying the principles of inhibition and direction to activity. For this, you need the personal tuition of an Alexander teacher. What follows is an illustration of this application.
You're about to make a movement, like getting out of a chair. Now, most of you, if you did it on automatic, if you rushed to get out of a chair, would probably get in and out of a chair the way you've always got in and out of a chair. By contracting the neck, pulling the head back and down, throwing the body forwards, and pulling yourself up and out of the chair, which, as we've seen, exerts a tremendous pull down into the spine, causing a collapse of the back, pressure into the hips, and a pull down into the legs. Pulling down all the way. Now, this isn't really what nature intended.
During your Alexander lessons, you will gradually experience an upward release. This upward energy is what nature intended. The real work of a pupil begins when he starts to maintain this new freedom in activities outside the teaching situation. Anthony demonstrates.
The first thing to do is, the second you have an idea to go into activity, like getting from a sitting position to a standing position, you have to stop. Because if you rush to get out of a chair straight away without pausing, you'll do the same old thing. So whatever the activity is, whether it's picking up a phone, starting to write, getting out of a chair, picking up something from the floor, when the idea comes to you to do something, stop. This stop gives you a chance to think how you're going to do the activity. The how you're going to do the activity, the means of doing this activity, is looking after your neck, head and back relationship. So in particular, you're going to get out of a chair, you stop. You say, I'm not going to rush out of a chair my normal way. I'm stopping and I'm going to pay particular attention to those three main things. The idea of the neck being free, the idea of the head releasing in a forwards and upwards potential, which really means not to pull it back and down, which allows the back to lengthen and widen up and away from the hips, rather than be contracted downwards. So, you look after the idea of the neck being free, the head leading upwards and out. Carry on with the upwards and outwards idea as you bring yourself forwards from the hips. You're still not rushing to get out of a chair, you're paying attention to the how. The back doesn't rush forwards, the head leads a movement, the heels go into the ground, and the head leads upwards. And you'll find, maybe not at the beginning, that the head leading the movement and the back staying back allows the body to lift itself up and out of the chair in a lighter way. Let's try another activity, sitting in a chair. The cardinal rule here is, when an idea comes to you to do something, like sitting or standing, you have to pause. You have to, in Alexander terms, inhibit your desire to rush to achieve your end. So, without rushing straight into the chair and pulling the head back and down and contracting, you've stopped. You wait, you pause, and you're going to choose how to actually go into activity. You want to remember these three main things, neck, head, and back. You want to remind your neck to be free, your head to point forwards and out, not retract backwards and down, your back to be lengthening and widening up there as the knees come forwards and the back stays back. You lower yourself into the chair without contracting and pulling down.
But you must not confuse thinking with doing or posturing. Don't hold yourself in any fixed position. Your thinking and directing will encourage good use and will help prevent the return of old tension habits.
I so well remember Alexander saying, if only they would think. People will insist on trying to do this. I've never told anybody to do anything. I've told them to think. And the clue in the thinking is the ability to teach yourself to be able not to react. And then the wonderful sense of freedom that you can get. You've got to try that, the ability to realize the beauty, the wonder of receiving a stimulus and not reacting.
Thinking in activity. Whatever the situation, you can decide not to react with your old tension habits. You can then choose to use your body as nature intended. If you maintain a good head, neck, and back relationship, your arms and legs will operate freely, and you can apply this to any activity.
You can imagine all the movements of planing and of the sawing and everything, watching the relation of head to neck as one sawed. With everything one did, it was the most marvelous thing to use one's hands with the conscious direction of the use of oneself. It means we've got this central thing which enables us to leave the wonderful movements of all the limbs and everything else to carry on while we maintain that direction. Now there you've got the human being knowing how to control reaction, how not to react, and therefore being free to choose, select the courses of action on small or big things. It's a wonderful exercise to apply all the time.